The Europe I wake up in these days is not the Europe I have known, not the Europe I have imagined or desired. For the past 2 years, isn't it, that between Lisbon and Helsinki and Sofia and Rome, we have been united by this silent and quite sensational fear on our shoulders. And sometimes by an unbearable feeling that we can no longer influence the course of events. Now see, I'm so puzzled about this. Here we are, one of the freest, most equal, cumulatively best educated, the wealthiest community of 500 million people on planet Earth. We are able, as I learned in a TEDx conversation yesterday, to produce DNA-based and operable human organs in laboratories, but we are not able to shut down banks in an orderly manner. We have a problem with money. That means we are ready to send some of our key foundations, some of our proudest principles down the drain. See, this is a big moment in European history. And many of us in this room, most of us alive in Europe today, remember how a big moment in European history can feel like. In 1989, one November night, we were glued to the TV sets. When the Berlin Wall came down, when people were climbing over it, crying of joy, I think most of us understood what really matters in Europe: freedom and solidarity. Freedom and solidarity, this was the attitude, this was the priority, this was the conviction of the time. It ran through rank and file. And today? Today, we are not making the crisis go away in Greece, in Spain, in Italy. Actually, we are trying to make the crisis stay away from Austria, from Germany, from Luxembourg, from the Netherlands. We are suddenly talking of North Europe and South Europe. In 1989, the Iron Curtain came down, and I grew up with this as a kid, knowing this as a dividing line between Europeans with freedom and Europeans without freedom. And today, some 22, 23 years later, we are erecting another curtain in Europe. And we will soon know it as the dividing line between Europeans with a future and Europeans without a future. See, I'm really concerned that we are about to turn yesterday's conviction into today's disgrace. And we will be asked, was there really no alternative? How about you and in this room? Would you know an answer? And see, some of you would. And this is what I try to get at. If this is our crisis, our Europe and our future, how can we get to our solution, our Europe and our future? 3 considerations. First one, why? The second one, who is there? And the third one is, what can we do? So why do we care? This is a time when political Europe is back in focus, and whether we like it or not, whether we ever bothered or not, political Europe is still the one place where the organizing framework of our lives is being decided and therefore defined. Now, it's about time that we understand why people in Nigeria or in Russia are envying us so much for our European achievements. And what are they really? Yes, peace and prosperity, that's what we learn. But what is at the heart of that? At the heart of that is the alternative to the raw rule of power. And the alternative to the raw rule of power is the rule of law. And the rule of law is something really beautiful because it turns us into equals, into citizens. It makes sure that we can actually have the freedom to lead our lives between Sofia and Helsinki and between Rome and Bratislava. The rule of law means that we can plan, that we can predict, that we do not have to negotiate the terms of our existence every morning. It's sort of the DNA of this united Europe. And I myself understood this only, or the dimension of this, when living in Kosovo for nearly 3 years, working in a diplomatic startup team by the European Union. And I saw how my friends and colleagues were constantly busy to manage their existential affairs. Like this one girl, she had to collect 45,000 euros overnight for the surgery of a family member. I mean, 45,000 euros overnight in an economy that doesn't really exist, that is really, really terrible to do. And the other guy, he had to mediate in the neighborhood conflict because the police would not ever be the place where you would go to if there's a conflict. So what I understood in my endeavors, looking often at Europe from its periphery, was that this kind of first-in-class Europe, this rule of law Europe, this human rights Europe, this civil liberties Europe, this really has been and will always be only an option. One option among others. And I really think if we decide in this room and outside that this is the kind of Europe we want, we better deposit this interest at certain occasions. My second consideration, who is there? I look in this room, I multiply that by 1,000 and 1,000 outside, and I see a great talent pool. I see people who are educated, connected. I see people who are so much thinking into the future. I mean, next week in Berlin, the MIT's Otto Scharmer and his Presencing Institute will do their global forum, which is all about new ways in leading and learning. And at the same time in Vienna, you will have Incredible Europe, which is also a co-creation workshop for a prosperous Europe. You have people who already work now to bring solar energy from Africa to Europe. You have people in the public administration in Vienna who are adapting today's infrastructure of the city to a city where there's no more private cars tomorrow. You have people who think about deliberative democracy, urban farming. There's all kinds of things going on. And so I think what defines this kind of innovation Europe, this civil Europe, is that we are ready to debunk the conventional wisdom. It's probably TED Europe, as we could call it. We are ready to debunk the conventional wisdom, to redefine our input variables, to question our assumptions. And I think most of us, if asked, would suggest to go about this crisis with lateral thinking, with systemic thinking, with design thinking. And most of us would certainly say, well, let's look not just at growth of the system, but actually at health of the system. So why? And I'm really asking this. How is it that so many of us in Innovation Europe are taking on the most complex tasks in crisis management, in change management, in the private sector, in science, in technology, but we are doing this so far away from political Europe, from governance Europe? I see governance Europe as a black box, also after a lot of trips to Brussels and a lot of involvements there. I have to admit that, yes, we have to confirm this. Not to us outside, also to many inside. It really is a black box. And at the same time, outside, I see this sort of paintbox, this bustling Europe, this Europe that, that I think would make for a lot of good change managers in this current crisis. But the people who I see signing up for the crisis management task are a lot of loud people. There are anti-European populists and nationalists and xenophobe. A lot of them are people who rather divide and not unite. And I think that their presence at the crisis management table is not so much the problem, but the problem is the absence of our kind at the crisis management table. Our kind includes two of my friends here in Tyrol. Both of them are men in their mid-40s, highly successful, internationally active freelancers in the corporate world. One of them is traveling a lot to China, and the other one is inventing games and traveling Europe all the time. And both of them told me, totally independent from each other just some days ago, what do you mean, Verena, political developments? I have stopped caring about these a long time ago. Now, this is not good. I really believe that this is a moment when caring about political Europe is no longer a matter of choice. It is a matter of duty. Brings me to my third point, what can we do? Now, clearly, Innovation Europe has missed the boat on the crisis management, so we better try now to get at least a spot in the post-crisis management exercise, or the co-creation exercise, the future management exercise. So I'm thinking of three things, and Paul really set the scene very nicely for me with acting, reflecting, and consulting, because I realized those are the three things that I'm also doing now in my daytime job, but also suggesting and sharing with you today. The first one would be an inventory exercise. I really invite each of you to go home tonight and think, what are the 3 values that you really want to carry through this current crisis? What are the 3 things that make Europe special, that are worth nurturing? I mean, we really have to ask ourselves this question. When the money's gone, when the curtain is back, when the borders are back, when there's maybe violence in some of our capital cities, and when there's no jobs for a lot of youth in Europe, what are the things that we are really fighting for? And so I think it would be interesting to define these European commons, not public commons or global commons as we often use it as a concept, but European commons. What are the values that we want to carry through this crisis? And this is something I want to start with some friends in the summer, also with an internet platform, European Commons. And the second thing is the kind of matchmaking exercise. It is really very important and always true to know that power will never be served on a plate. We will not get a phone call to take part in any negotiation in Brussels ever. We have to get our seat there. We have to get ourselves there. And this is what I call the matchmaking exercise between the sort of paintbox Europe and the governance Europe. Now, I'm working with an author, Robert Menasse, who really is a great example for me in this kind of bridge building, because he did not have a lot to say about the European Union. We actually had a fight about it in 2005. And then some years later, he got himself a ticket on a train to Brussels. He rented an apartment there, and he started asking people in Brussels, so how does this place actually work? And by now, his articles and his thoughts are all over the German sort of quality media, and he's one of the handful of people who is also really listened to in some of the strategy groupings in Brussels. And what I like is, because he's one of the guys from literary Europe who is showing up there, it's also that he doesn't get the killer phrases. I mean, this guy can really ask people and say, who in your team is working to abolish the European Council? And he doesn't get those killer phrases like, oh, but that's not possible, or that's too political, or that's not political enough. And what I find special about Robert Menasse is not that he is so much more intelligent and so much more, I don't know, creative or active than others, but he is one of the handful of people from the sort of novelist Europe who showed up in Brussels and said, look, this is not just your Brussels or your European Union. This is also mine. I want to understand this. This is our European Union. So matchmaking, whatever kind of shape it takes, I think it's really important. And the third thing is that we better prepare ourselves for a European convention. Now you will say, what? And really, it's not being talked about quite yet, but I sort of sense it, that we might see this happening maybe earlier or sooner than we think. And if we don't see it happening, we might have to organize it ourselves. The issue is that we are hopefully to renegotiate the foundations of our commonwealth. And I want to see Innovation Europe there. I want to see all of you there. I want to see TED Europe there. I dream of an interdisciplinary European convention next time, because we had one about a decade ago, and that involved mostly people from this sort of governance Europe. Now you will say, look, this girl, she has sort of a crazy idea. We are not members of political parties. We are sort of the generation of student exchange Europe. We don't have a mandate, we don't have an experience, we don't know anything about a European convention. We have 42 countries, friends on Facebook, but really a European convention, this is not our thing. Now, have you ever considered who was the person who in this hell house of Europe in 1945, starting in the summer, in a makeshift hotel room in Paris, putting a piece of wood over the bathtub and using this as his desk? Who was that person who first called up some people and said, let's start negotiations? Who was the person who wrote the first draft for this United Europe, or what came out of it in many, many, many steps later? Who was that person who insisted that Germany is not punished but actually it's also a stakeholder of the future, just like all other players. This was Jean Monnet. Now, what I find so interesting about Jean Monnet is that he was not a member of a political party. He had no task in the bureaucracy, and he was not a member of an elected government. This man was a public interest freelancer. I mean, were he alive today, he would probably be speaking somewhere here. This guy was a political entrepreneur. So what does this tell us? This tells us that actually United Europe, or at its cradle, were people from Innovation Europe and were people from co-creation Europe. Today we call him the founding father of the European Union. So if we don't want another curtain go down, and if we don't want our ministers of interior bringing the borders back and bringing the division back and suddenly making it sort of the attitude of the day that we can say, yes, those people are sort of bad because they haven't done their homework and so on, we might want to think back to 1989 and also how a person like Jean Monnet was managing to make that sort of seemingly impossible possible. And there is some sentence that I will always remember because I often lose my courage myself in these undertakings these days. There's one sentence that I once saw in an editorial office in a newspaper, in a TV editorial office in Kosovo. It's a phrase by Jim Goodwin who said, "The impossible is often the untried." Thank you.